If you're watching this right now, something inside you already knows. You've been feeling it, haven't you? That strange sense that reality isn't quite what it used to be. Time feels different. Conversations feel scripted. You're having the same experiences over and over, like you're trapped in some cosmic loop, and everyone around you, they're acting like everything is normal. But you can see the patterns now. You notice the synchronicities, you feel the glitches in the matrix, and maybe, just maybe, you're starting to wonder if you're losing your mind. Let me tell you something right now. You're not going crazy, you're waking up. What you're experiencing has a name. It's called the observer loop, and once you understand what it is and how to break it, your entire reality will shift so fast it'll take your breath away. I'm talking about immediate changes, not months, not weeks. We're talking about reality responding to you differently within hours, synchronicities flooding your experience, people treating you differently, opportunities appearing out of nowhere, technology responding to your thoughts, your physical body healing itself. I know this sounds impossible. I know it sounds too good to be true, but I've been where you are. I've felt that same confusion, that same isolation, that same desperate need to understand what's happening to me. 3 years ago, I was trapped in the most suffocating version of reality you can imagine. Same job, same conversations, same disappointments, day after day. I felt like I was living in a simulation where someone had hit the repeat button. Every morning, I'd wake up hoping something would be different, but it never was. I tried everything. Therapy, meditation, self-help books, positive thinking, vision boards, none of it worked. Because I was trying to change my reality from inside the very loop that was creating it. Then I discovered something that changed everything. A principle from quantum physics that most people don't understand. Something so simple yet so profound that once you get it, you can never go back to the old way of being. You see, in quantum mechanics, there's something called the observer effect. It means that the very act of observing something changes it. Your consciousness doesn't just experience reality, it participates in creating it. But here's what they don't tell you. Most people's consciousness is stuck in what I call the observer loop. You're observing the same patterns, the same possibilities, the same limited version of reality over and over again. And because you're observing it, you keep creating it. You're literally manufacturing your own prison. And the bars are made of your own awareness. But what if I told you that you're just one shift away from breaking free? What if I told you that the same consciousness that's been trapping you is the key to your liberation? What if I told you that you don't need to change anything external? You don't need to quit your job, leave your relationship, or move to another city. You just need to change the quality of your observation. And when you do, reality will reorganize itself around your new way of being, so fast it'll feel like magic. I know you've probably heard promises like this before. I know you might be skeptical, but I'm not here to convince you of anything. I'm here to show you what's already happening inside you. Because if you're watching this, the process has already begun. You're already starting to break the loop. The question is, are you ready to complete the breakthrough? Let me paint you a picture of what the observer loop actually looks like in your daily life, because I know you're living it right now. You wake up, and before you even open your eyes, you already know how the day is going to go. You'll have the same conversations with the same people. Your boss will say the same things. Your partner will react the same way. You'll feel the same emotions, think the same thoughts, and go to bed with the same sense of emptiness. It's like you're an actor in a play, but someone forgot to give you a new script. So you keep performing the same scenes over and over, hoping that somehow, this time will be different. But it never is. And the worst part? Everyone around you seems perfectly content with this repetition. They don't see the patterns, they don't feel the suffocation. They think you're being dramatic when you try to explain that something fundamental is wrong with the way reality is operating. So you start to doubt yourself. Maybe you are crazy, maybe you're just ungrateful. Maybe this is just how life is supposed to be. But deep down, you know better. You know there's more, you can feel it calling to you, like a song you can almost remember but can't quite hear. This is what happened to me. I was working in corporate consulting, making good money, living what everyone else considered a successful life. but I felt like I was dying inside. Every day was identical. Same meetings, same problems, same solutions that never really solved anything. I'd sit in those conference rooms listening to people talk about quarterly projections and market strategies, and I'd feel like I was watching a movie I'd seen 1,000 times. I knew exactly what everyone was going to say before they said it. And it wasn't just work. My relationships felt scripted too. I'd have the same arguments with my girlfriend, the same conversations with my friends. Even my thoughts felt repetitive, like a broken record playing the same song on loop. I started having these moments where time would feel completely distorted. I'd look at the clock and swear only 5 minutes had passed, but it had been 2 hours. Or I'd feel like I'd been working all day, but it was still morning. Then the synchronicities started. I'd think about someone and they'd call. I'd need something and it would appear. I'd have a question and the answer would show up in the most random places. At first, I thought it was just coincidence, but it kept happening. More and more frequently until it became impossible to ignore. I started researching quantum physics, consciousness studies, ancient wisdom traditions. And that's when I discovered that what I was experiencing wasn't unique. It wasn't a breakdown, it was a breakthrough. But knowing this didn't immediately fix anything. In fact, it made things worse for a while. Because now I had language for what was happening, but I still didn't know how to change it. I tried to use my new understanding to manipulate my reality. I'd visualize different outcomes. I'd try to force synchronicities. I'd attempt to think my way into a new experience. But nothing worked, because I was still operating from inside the loop. I was still the same observer, just with more sophisticated concepts about what I was observing. It's like trying to escape from a prison by redecorating your cell. You might make it prettier, but you're still trapped. And this is where most people get stuck. They learn about consciousness and manifestation and quantum physics, and they think that intellectual understanding is enough. They think that knowing about the observer loop means they've broken it. But knowledge isn't transformation. Information isn't liberation. The observer loop isn't broken by thinking differently. It's broken by observing differently. And that's a completely different thing. You see, the loop isn't created by what you're observing. It's created by how you're observing. It's created by the quality of your attention. It's created by the frequency from which your consciousness is operating. Most people are observing reality from a state of separation. They see themselves as separate from what they're experiencing. They're trying to get something from reality rather than recognizing that they are reality experiencing itself. This creates a fundamental distortion in the observation process. It's like trying to see your own face without a mirror. The very act of trying creates the impossibility. But what if you could step outside the observer entirely? What if you could become the awareness that's aware of the observer? What if you could watch the watcher? This is where everything changes. This is where the loop breaks. This is where reality becomes fluid again. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because before I could discover this, I had to go through the darkest period of my entire life. The breakthrough came when I stopped trying to escape the loop and started studying it instead. I realized that the observer loop wasn't my enemy. It was my teacher. It was showing me exactly how consciousness creates reality. It was giving me a masterclass in the mechanics of manifestation. You see, when you're stuck in the loop, you get to see the same patterns over and over again. And if you pay attention, really pay attention, you start to notice something incredible. You start to see the gap between observation and manifestation. There's this moment, this tiny space between when you observe something and when it becomes your reality. Most people miss it because it happens so fast. But when you're in the loop, everything slows down. You get to see the process in slow motion. And that's when I discovered the secret. The observer loop isn't created by what you're observing. It's created by the observer itself. Let me explain what I mean. In quantum physics, they talk about the collapse of the wave function. Before observation, all possibilities exist simultaneously in what they call a superposition. But the moment consciousness observes, the wave function collapses into a single reality. Now here's the key insight that changed everything for me. Most people think they're observing reality, but actually reality is observing itself through them. You are not a separate being observing the universe. You are the universe observing itself through the lens of your individual consciousness. But when your consciousness gets trapped in patterns, when it becomes rigid and repetitive, it keeps collapsing the same possibilities over and over again. It's like having a radio that's stuck on one station. All the other frequencies are still there, but you can't access them. The observer loop is what happens when your consciousness gets stuck on one frequency of reality. But consciousness isn't fixed. It's not solid. It's fluid, dynamic, creative, and it can be tuned to different frequencies. The moment I understood this, everything shifted. I stopped trying to change what I was observing, and I started changing how I was observing. Instead of looking at my life from the perspective of someone who was trapped, I started observing from the perspective of someone who was free. Instead of seeing problems, I started seeing possibilities. Instead of feeling separate from my experience, I started recognizing myself as the creative force behind it. And that's when the magic started happening. The first sign was the synchronicities. They didn't just increase, they became impossible to ignore. I'd think about needing something and it would appear within hours. I'd wonder about a question and the answer would show up in the most unexpected ways. But it wasn't just external synchronicities. My internal experience started shifting too. Thoughts that had been looping for years suddenly stopped. Emotions that had felt stuck began to flow. Patterns that had seemed permanent started dissolving. I remember the exact moment I knew something fundamental had changed. I was sitting in the same conference room where I'd felt so trapped before, same people, same meeting, same agenda. But everything felt different. Instead of feeling like a victim of the conversation, I felt like the space in which the conversation was happening. Instead of being caught up in the drama, I was the awareness witnessing the drama. And from that space, I could see possibilities that hadn't been visible before. I could sense the potential for the meeting to go in completely different directions. I could feel the malleability of the situation. That's when I realized that the observer loop hadn't been trapping me in a fixed reality. It had been showing me how reality gets fixed in the first place. When you observe from a state of contraction, you create contracted realities. When you observe from a state of expansion, you create expanded realities. When you observe from a state of separation, you create experiences of separation. When you observe from a state of unity, you create experiences of unity. The quality of your observation determines the quality of your reality. But here's what's really incredible. Once you understand this, you don't have to wait for your external circumstances to change to start experiencing a different reality. You can shift your reality immediately by shifting the quality of your observation. I started experimenting with this. In conversations, instead of observing from the perspective of someone who was bored or frustrated, I'd observe from the perspective of someone who was curious and engaged. Immediately, the conversations became more interesting. In challenging situations, instead of observing from the perspective of someone who was overwhelmed, I'd observe from the perspective of someone who was capable and resourceful. Immediately, solutions would become apparent. In relationships, instead of observing from the perspective of someone who was misunderstood, I'd observe from the perspective of someone who was deeply connected. Immediately, the quality of connection would shift. It was like I had discovered a remote control for reality. And the buttons weren't external actions. They were internal shifts in the quality of my observation. But this was just the beginning. Because once you break the observer loop, you realize that you've been living in just one tiny corner of an infinite field of possibilities. Now, I need to be honest with you about something. Breaking the observer loop isn't a one-time event. It's not like flipping a switch and suddenly everything is perfect forever. What I discovered is that consciousness has momentum. Just like a river that's been flowing in the same direction for years, doesn't immediately change course when you remove a dam. Your consciousness doesn't immediately stabilize in a new pattern just because you've had a breakthrough. The old patterns have what I call gravitational pull. They want to reassert themselves. They want to pull you back into the familiar loop. This is where most people get discouraged. They have a profound realization. They experience a shift in their reality, and then they find themselves slipping back into old patterns. They start to doubt whether the breakthrough was real. Let me tell you, the breakthrough is real. But integration is a process. Think of it like learning to walk. The first time you stood up as a child, you didn't immediately start running marathons. You took a few steps, you fell down, you got back up, you took a few more steps. Gradually, walking became natural. Breaking the observer loop is similar. You have moments of expanded awareness, then you contract back into old patterns. You experience reality as fluid and responsive, then it seems to solidify again. You feel like the creator of your experience, then you feel like a victim of circumstances. This is normal. This is part of the process. This is how consciousness learns to operate from a new frequency. But here's what I learned during this integration phase that changed everything. The goal isn't to never fall back into old patterns. The goal is to recognize when you're in a pattern and have the ability to shift out of it. You see, the observer loop isn't something you escape from once and for all. It's something you learn to navigate consciously. It becomes a tool rather than a trap. When you're conscious of the loop, you can use it intentionally. You can choose which patterns to reinforce and which ones to dissolve. You can deliberately collapse certain possibilities while leaving others open. This is what I call conscious reality navigation. But learning this skill requires practice. And practice means you're going to make mistakes. You're going to find yourself stuck in old loops. You're going to forget that you have the power to shift your observation. During my integration phase, I went through periods where I felt like I was losing my mind all over again. I'd have days where reality felt completely solid and unchangeable. I'd have weeks where the synchronicities stopped and everything felt ordinary again. I remember one particularly difficult period where I started doubting everything I'd learned. Maybe it had all been wishful thinking. Maybe I'd just been going through a phase. Maybe the observer loop was just a fancy name for delusion. But then something would happen that would remind me of the truth. A synchronicity so perfect it couldn't be coincidence. A shift in reality so immediate and obvious that I couldn't deny it. A moment of expanded awareness so clear that I remembered who I really was. And I realized that these periods of doubt weren't setbacks. They were part of the process. They were opportunities to deepen my understanding and strengthen my ability to navigate different states of consciousness. You see, when you first break the observer loop, it's often because you're in an extreme state. You're so frustrated with your current reality that you're willing to try anything. You're so desperate for change that you're open to possibilities you would normally dismiss. But as you start to integrate this new way of being, you have to learn how to access expanded states of consciousness, even when you're not in crisis. You have to learn how to shift your observation even when everything seems fine. This is actually much more challenging than the initial breakthrough, because when everything is going well, there's less motivation to examine the quality of your observation. There's less urgency to break out of patterns. But this is where the real mastery develops. This is where you learn to live as a conscious creator rather than just having occasional experiences of conscious creation. I started developing what I call reality check practices. Simple ways to assess the quality of my observation throughout the day. Questions I would ask myself to determine whether I was operating from an expanded state or a contracted state. Am I observing this situation from a place of curiosity or judgment? Am I seeing possibilities or limitations? Am I feeling connected to my experience or separate from it? These simple check-ins became incredibly powerful because they gave me the ability to course correct in real time. Instead of spending days or weeks stuck in old patterns before realizing what was happening, I could catch myself within minutes or hours, and the more I practiced this, the more natural it became. The expanded states of consciousness became my default rather than the exception. But even now, years later, I still have moments where I slip back into old patterns. The difference is that now I recognize them quickly and I know how to shift out of them. This is the real gift of breaking the observer loop. Not that you never get stuck again, but that you develop the skill to unstick yourself whenever you need to soon. Now I want to share with you what life looks like on the other side of the observer loop. Because this is where you're heading, and I want you to know what's possible for you. When you master conscious reality navigation, life becomes a completely different experience. You're no longer at the mercy of circumstances. You're not waiting for external conditions to change before you can feel good. You're not hoping that other people will behave differently so you can be happy. Instead, you become the conscious creator of your moment-to-moment experience. You realize that every situation is an opportunity to practice a different quality of observation. Every challenge becomes a chance to demonstrate your mastery. Let me give you some concrete examples of how this shows up in daily life. In conversations, you're no longer trying to get something from the other person. You're not trying to convince them, impress them, or get them to validate you. Instead, you're observing from a place of genuine curiosity and connection. And because of this shift in your observation, people respond to you differently. They open up more, they trust you more, they're drawn to your presence. In work situations, you're not observing from the perspective of someone who has to do things they don't want to do. You're observing from the perspective of someone who is expressing their creativity and contributing their unique gifts. And because of this shift, opportunities start appearing. Projects become more fulfilling. Colleagues start treating you with more respect. In challenging situations, you're not observing from the perspective of someone who is being victimized by circumstances. You're observing from the perspective of someone who is being invited to expand and grow. And because of this shift, you start seeing solutions that weren't visible before. You start accessing resources you didn't know you had. But the most profound change is in your relationship with time and possibility. When you're stuck in the observer loop, the future feels predetermined. You can predict how things are going to go because they always go the same way. But when you break the loop, the future becomes fluid. You realize that there are infinite possibilities available in every moment. You start living in a state of creative anticipation rather than resigned expectation. I remember the first time I really understood this. I was facing a situation that, from my old way of observing, seemed impossible to resolve. I had a business challenge that appeared to have no solution. Every option I could think of led to the same dead end. But instead of observing from the perspective of someone who was stuck, I shifted to observing from the perspective of someone who was about to discover a creative solution. I didn't know what the solution was. I just held the quality of observation that assumed one existed. Within 24 hours, a completely unexpected opportunity presented itself. Someone I hadn't spoken to in years reached out with a proposal that solved my problem in a way I never could have imagined. This wasn't coincidence. This was conscious reality navigation in action, and the more I practiced this, the more normal it became. Impossible situations resolving themselves, perfect timing becoming the norm, resources appearing exactly when needed. But here's what I want you to understand. This isn't magic. This isn't wishful thinking. This is how reality actually works when you're not trapped in the observer loop. You see, the universe is infinitely creative and infinitely responsive. It's constantly offering you new possibilities, new solutions, new opportunities. But when you're observing from a contracted state, you can't see them. They're outside your field of perception. When you expand your observation, you expand your field of perception. You start noticing possibilities that were always there but were invisible to your previous way of seeing. This is why breaking the observer loop creates such immediate changes in your reality. You're not actually changing reality. You're changing your ability to perceive and interact with the reality that's already there. And here's the most beautiful part. As you master this way of being, you become a gift to everyone around you. Your expanded observation creates space for other people to expand their observation. Your freedom gives others permission to be free. You become what I call a reality anchor. You anchor new possibilities into the collective field of consciousness. You make it easier for other people to break their own observer loops. This is happening right now as you watch this video. Your willingness to consider these ideas, your openness to a different way of being, is contributing to a massive shift in human consciousness. We are living in a time of unprecedented awakening. More and more people are breaking free from the observer loop. More and more people are remembering their true nature as conscious creators. And you are part of this movement. You are one of the pioneers. You are helping to birth a new way of being human. So here's my invitation to you. Don't wait for perfect conditions to start practicing conscious reality navigation. Don't wait until you fully understand everything I've shared. Don't wait until you feel ready. Start now. Start with the next conversation you have. Start with the next challenge you face. Start with the next moment of your life. Ask yourself, how am I observing this situation? What quality of attention am I bringing to this experience? What possibilities am I open to that I wasn't open to a moment ago? Your reality is waiting to respond to your expanded observation. Your life is ready to become the masterpiece you came here to create. The observer loop is breaking. Your new reality is emerging, and it's happening right now. Welcome to your awakening. Welcome to your freedom. Welcome to the life you've always known was possible. The question is, are you ready to step into it?